Hey guys, this is probably the end of the season for my peppers, and these are the last 3 bell peppers I'll probably have off of these plants this year. But I'm not going to cut them down and put them into the compost pile because I want to overwinter them in the greenhouse. I'm going to show you a few quick steps on exactly how to do this so you can redo these peppers next year back into your garden, and you'll have a perennial pepper plant that will just produce even faster at the beginning of next season. So guys, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to remove any peppers that are still on the plants. And some of these have actually rotted on the vine. So I'm just going to go through removing all of my peppers. And these actually will go back into the compost, but I'm just cutting all these off. I'm not sure if some of these are edible, but I'll take a close look at them. I think some of them have actually rotted on the vine. So I'm just making sure I'm getting all the peppers before I remove and defoliate the entire plant. So guys, I wanted to mention one way I am overwintering these, and this is a 3-gallon fabric grow bag, and it's very durable. But one reason I want to use this is this will automatically air prune the roots as it grows inside the grow bag, and it's also extremely well draining, even better than plastic. So if I had to choose between plastic and a fabric grow bag, I'm going to choose this type every time. So guys, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to completely defoliate the plant all the way down to about 12 inches high. We want to remove all the branches, all the foliage, and just get it down to a basic plant. So I'm going to do that now on both pepper plants. Okay guys, since the soil is really loose, I'm just going to try to carefully pull it out of the ground without damaging the roots. And I may have to come in with a digging tool and try not to damage the root system, but I think it might come out. But I'm going to come in with a tool, a hori-hori knife, and then cut around the edges so I can make sure I got the entire root ball. So guys, I don't know if you've ever used one of these, but this is a Japanese hori-hori knife. It's very easy to dig up a plant with it. We're just going to go around the perimeter of the plant and just kind of separate it from some of its root ball. We don't want the root ball too awful big. And so we're just going to kind of go around the outer edges of it. All right, now we're going to see if we can carefully pull the pepper out of the ground. There you go. And I think we've got a majority of it. Some of the outer edges may have been pruned away, but that's perfectly okay. We have a small grow bag. And so I'm going to remove the rest of the soil with a hose because we don't want to bring any of the soil into the greenhouse because it could have insect eggs in it. And so we don't want them surviving throughout the winter in our greenhouse and infesting the other plants we have. Okay guys, I'm going to wash out the root ball and hopefully remove any potential pest or insect eggs that might be in there, and we'll make sure we don't bring those into the greenhouse. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spray it with our homemade pesticide mix. I'll put a link to how to make that up above. I'm just going to give it a light dusting all over the root ball and the roots themselves, and it's perfectly safe. It's non-toxic. It's all organic, and this will remove any potential insects that might try to take up residence in our greenhouse. Okay guys, we're going to do the same thing to this second pepper plant. We're going to defoliate it and cut it back to about 12 inches or less. So guys, the mix I'm doing for our 3-gallon grow bags is going to be 1 part vermiculite, 1 part cactus mixed soil, and 1 part shredded pine bark. So I'm going to mix this by hand thoroughly, and the reason I'm using cactus mix, perlite, and the shredded pine bark, we don't want our peppers standing in water or have too much moisture in the soil. So this is going to be an extremely well draining soil. You wouldn't want to use this in the summertime because the peppers would dry out too quickly, but in the wintertime when they're in a state of dormancy, this is perfectly okay. So guys, I'm going to do a little bit of pruning on the roots. That's something we very commonly do in the bonsai world, and that will help stabilize its growth and help it through the winter's dormancy. So that way it will be just fine in our small pot. It will not be under too much stress because we've enabled it to be a little bit smaller on the root ball, because we've also totally defoliated the top part of the plant. So this is going to really help it by doing a little bit of pruning on the bottom side. So I'm going to fill up our grow bag. Okay, I'm not going to fill it quite to the top, as I'm going to put a little bit more of the pine bark mulch on the top just to help retain a little bit of moisture in case we get a little bit of hot weather and the greenhouse gets a little bit warm. I'm going to plant this. And lastly, I'm not going to go too deep, but just maybe an inch into the soil. And now lastly, I'm going to come back with some of our shredded pine bark and put about 1 to 1.5 inches on the topsoil. Now I have my pine bark ready to go on as our topping or dressing in our mulch. But before I do that, I'm going to put in a little bit of bone meal. There's very low nitrogen in bone meal, but what we're wanting is root growth throughout the winter. Okay guys, so I've added some bone meal to our top before we come in with our pine bark, and I'm just putting that across the soil. Now I'm going to carefully add this as a water retentive agent, and I'm just going to put that all across the top of our pepper plant, and it's going to go back outside, be watered, and I'll bring it back in the greenhouse and it'll be ready to go throughout the winter. Now one thing you'll notice is both of these pepper plants kind of come to a Y formation, and that's why you want to leave the big branches on there, so next season when these go back in the ground, they'll start producing a lot more shoots and offshoots and leaves and peppers a lot sooner. So just remember, you don't want to cut it all the way back to the ground and remove below where they split off into branches. Remember, you want to leave about 2 or 3 on each plant so it'll have a head start next spring. Now another note on the bone meal I added, I will not do that again until the springtime when it's ready to go into its production of leaves. So just remember that you won't need to fertilize this throughout the winter, whether you keep it in a greenhouse, a window in your basement, somewhere that it stays above freezing. But just remember, you won't need to fertilize until next spring. So I'm sure someone will ask me how much bone meal that I add, and I'll probably forget to put that in the description. So I'll tell you now, it's about 2 heaping tablespoons lightly sprinkled on the top of the soil, and you can slowly blend that a little bit if you want to, or you can just leave it sitting on top of the soil. Either way, it doesn't hurt at all. Now another note on bringing these indoors, if you live in a climate that can have warmer days like 40, 50, 60, then you could take them out during the day, but you need to install a frost warning app on your phone, so that way if there's a chance of frost, you won't forget and leave them outside, because once the frost gets on them, it could do a lot of damage and your poor pepper plant may not survive. So if the climate you live in is a really cold one and the days do not get above freezing for long periods of time, you're going to want to make sure you put these in a south facing window so they get a lot of sunlight. If you don't have that type of window in your house where you can have them having full sunlight as much as possible, try installing a grow light somewhere where they can get lots of light, because they will need that. I'm lucky, I'm having them in the greenhouse, and these will do just fine in here. But just remember, they don't want to be where they don't have some light. They love light. That's one thing about peppers. The more light, the better. Now, if you do opt for the grow light, you're going to want to make sure they're under that grow light anywhere from 8 to 10 hours or maybe 11 hours. So just remember that if you don't have a window that gets a lot of sunlight, that's what you want to consider, is having them under a grow light so they'll perform well next spring when you bring them outside. Like I said earlier, you don't want them in a dark area of your house. Now, one note about when you first bring them inside your home after they went through this stressful activity, you may want to slowly acclimate them to the window light, maybe 2 to 3 hours a day, and then increase that by an hour, because they have underwent a quite amount of stress. Same thing with the grow light. You just want to increase that light 2 or 3 hours at a time for about 3 or 4 days until it kind of gets used to being in its new home. Now, I want to say one note about overwintering peppers. Not all pepper plants are going to survive. So if it doesn't survive the winter, don't take it too hard. It's just sometimes peppers don't do well in the overwintering process, but there's a pretty good chance they will. Now, next spring, when it's time to take them outside, you want to acclimate them to the outdoors slowly. You don't want to take them out and leave them out in full sunlight. You want to put them in a shady spot about 3 to 6 hours for the first few days, and of course make sure there's no chance of frost. You want to make sure you're past your frost date, and you can discover your last estimated frost date by going to weather.gov, putting in your zip code, and it'll give you that estimated date. But again, a frost warning on your phone, that app would be very invaluable, especially when you have something that might be damaged by frost. So after you bring them out, you want to keep them in shade in the beginning, and then once they've been outdoors for about 3 to 5 days, then you can start to reintroduce them to sunlight. So guys, if frost is approaching your area, I hope you'll consider doing this with your pepper plants, because it really saves you. First, it saves you money, and it also saves you a lot of time, because your pepper plants will have a head start on producing peppers for you next year, and you'll get your peppers, your first set of peppers, even earlier than you did in the current year's growth. So guys, I just want to say thanks so much for watching. If I left something out, please leave a comment down below, and I really appreciate you watching. I appreciate every subscriber. Have a great day.